and talk a little bit about evaluating surveys and observations. There we go. I had wanted to talk just a little bit more about this appreciation scale that we were mentioning last time. And it kind of helps to come in and take a look at the data here. In the textbook, I described the fact that, the example that they give is not really a great one of discriminant validity. And inside of this, we have a whole bunch of items that deal with how often you appreciate someone and how appreciated you feel. And the correlation matrix in that really kind of makes things a little clearer to us that when you're looking at a correlation, you can think about what's going on. And as you're looking at these items, you can see that the correlations between the disposition variables give you kind of some higher correlations inside the various topics. And then as you're looking at the other items, the off diagonals, we start to see smaller correlations. So that's kind of an example of a better view of how you can get conversion and discriminant validity and appreciation in the relationships. Okay. So coming back into chapter 6, this gets us into some things that we need to think about if you're designing a study and you're going to do surveys. I'm kind of reminded of Mark Twain, who said, "I used to be a liar, but I gave it up. The field is overrun with amateurs." And one of the things that I think we do as a disservice in statistics is we talk an awful lot about how to lie with statistics. And we don't spend as much time, and we talk about, and how to lie with statistics is how to mislead people visually or in terms of the argument you make. And we don't talk enough about how to use statistics to make a fair description of the data. And in the same way, when we do surveys, there's lots of ways to design a survey that will pull or push people to a response that you might like to see. But in this chapter, we're thinking about how you can ask questions and the things that you should avoid in actually figuring out how people feel or what the actual behaviors are that are connected to other behaviors. So it helps to talk just a little bit first about our individual items that we might look at. Should we go to eat at a particular restaurant? These people in the upper left-hand corner are doing, it got 4 stars on Yelp. Or if we're doing polling over the course of time about, say, how much we approve of the newly elected president, or how we feel about the police, or in terms of clinical psychology, if we're looking at adverse childhood experiences that happen to people. At the bottom right hand, they're showing someone being removed from the home with the child looking on. Sometimes we do questions that are called forced choice. And these are just yes/no questions. And this is one format that you may have taken a look at. So before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that you might feel you're physically hurt? Or before your 18th birthday, did someone push, slap, grab, stab, even something, or hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? And this forced format, you can say yes, or you can say no, is one way that you'll often see people do survey results. It has some advantages, it has some disadvantages. So It doesn't tell you a matter of degree. It doesn't tell you really what the particular types of abuse are. And you might think that being hit so hard that you had marks and injured is something that's much more severe than, say, just pushing or grabbing somebody. There are other formats. We talked earlier about Likert formats, a 1 to 5 scale, or a semantic differential, where instead of strongly agree to strongly disagree, we put some other words that reflect a sentiment. Another type of rating are stars. You just indicate very roughly how you like things. You might wonder, though, is the number of stars actually an indicator of the quality of the restaurant? And who are you looking at who's giving the stars? So thinking this through a little bit, particularly in such a political era, there's one podcast that I listened to, Historical Blindness, and it got really, really good reviews for a while. That person made some comments during the insurrection on the podcast, and several individuals who were fans of the former president started giving that podcast very low ratings and brought the average down quite a bit. If you're looking at 145 reviews of a brewing company in this case, who's doing the rating? Are those people comparable to you? Are those individuals informed individuals? Do they go around and look at other dining options in the area? Should you necessarily trust them? It's really important to talk about how you word the question. Now, this is an example from the book where we're just saying, what's your opinion? Do you mostly favor, oppose, or strongly oppose voter ID? A second way to answer that question is opponents of voter IDs argue they'll prevent people who are eligible from voting. And finally, opponents of voter ID laws argue they'll prevent people who are eligible to vote and that the laws especially differentially affect African American voters. What's your opinion? Notice in the right-hand column that this percentage goes down for people who promote, favor voter ID laws. You can also load that a little bit differently by saying, some people say, or to quote the former president, people are saying that a lot of voter fraud happens. What's your opinion? Do you favor voter IDs? You could push that number even further. That becomes a question. Which of these ways should we ask this question? Or to be more balanced, would you have better information if you said something like, people have different ideas about voter ID laws. Some people say that this disadvantages people of color and disabled voters. Others argue that will prevent voter ID fraud. What do you favor? By front loading that information about what the arguments are you going to get better information? Often asking the item in multiple formats is a good thing. This explains a little bit why you're seeing, hey, didn't I just answer a question pretty much like this before when I'm doing a survey? But it also helps to standardize things if you can anchor those questions by providing at least some context to the arguments that are involved. I talked, a little bit here about things that you need to avoid if you're designing a survey. So in research methods 2, you will probably be doing some kind of assessment. And here are some things to look out for. Double-barreled questions. In other words, if you're asking a question that has more than one part to it, how's a person really supposed to answer that question? So do you agree or disagree? Should cars be faster and safer or not? Well, what if you think they should be faster, safer, but you don't necessarily care about whether they're faster? Or are you satisfied with your pay and job conditions? Well, we've all taken jobs, I think, where the job might have been a lot of fun, but the pay was lousy. What are you supposed to say? And how often and how much time do you spend on each visit to the hospital? Again, that should be really two questions. As well as, do you think there's a good market for this product? Will it sell well? Should the government spend less money on the military and more on education? Well, what if you think the government should just spend less money, period? Or what if you think we should keep the military funding where it is and increase funding for education? Is this tool interesting and useful? All of these questions were taken from surveys that people wrote. And it's important that when you're looking at something, you think about, is this really one question or should it be two? Double negative questions. Do you agree that boys who play football are not uncommon? You have to kind of think about that a little bit, and you're going to get people who will read the question quickly and they will mess things up. The book talks a little bit about a Holocaust denial question that was a double negative. And if you actually ask the question in a straightforward fashion, you get a much different percentage. Don't use jargon. And that becomes kind of a problem, especially in education, especially in research, when we throw around terms like fMRI or significant, and we're not thinking about, do our participants understand what it is that we intend with those words? I don't know if you get lots of polls from organizations, but in typical old person fashion, we finally got rid of our landline and we kept getting polls all the time on the phone that were leading questions. So, especially, at Mizzou, the people who are doing work in the area want to be recognized and they want to make the case that, oh yeah, customers are really happy with this. So you like Mizzou's new and improved software for a platform, don't you? And, you really are trying to push for a yes answer. Loaded questions are also not a good thing to be doing. Is it terrible for parents to spank their children? Is going to give you a lot different answers than should parents be allowed to spank their children. That's particularly touchy little topic in Missouri, where there are many individuals who think that not only should the parents spank the kids, but the teachers should too. But asking it in a neutral fashion is going to give you a better sense of the sentiment for that. Don't assume I duplicated the word specifics twice. Don't assume that your person is going to swallow all of the particular parts of the question that you have. How is the person supposed to answer if they agree with maybe the conclusion, but they don't think that the reason is the reason that you indicate? So do you think the lack of faculty incentive for good teaching causes student morale to be low at MU? Maybe you think that student morale is low. I was just talking with my daughter last night who said, I'm really tired of COVID on this campus. Morale is very low. But if you're giving this question, you might agree that morale is low, but you might not agree that it's, say, due to the faculty incentive for good teaching. And again, that might be different questions. It might be a checklist. So you might say, is student morale low at MU? And if so, here's a bunch of reasons why. That's going to get you significantly better data. Order of questions is a big issue. Now, the book makes some hay of the fact that, if your name is first on the ballot, you're about 5% more likely to get voted for than if you're later. And this is why, for example, in Boone County, when you vote, you'll see that they have mixed up the order of the votes. They don't do different ballots. What they do is they choose by lot when they design the ballot who's going to be at the top of the ballot. But that's an attempt to cover the order effect. There's lots of order effects that are present in questionnaires. So if you begin your survey asking about, say, have you seen videos of police violence against people of color? How upset are you at police violence? And then after that, you ask, should police be defunded? You're going to get a different pattern of answers than if you ask for the defunded question first, for example. So you're designing the questionnaire on the internet or in paper and pencil. Response sets are an issue. Now, you have all been through, or many of you have been through Psych 1 and taken things on the internet. Generally speaking, gang, I ran my first internet survey with an honors undergraduate last year, and we ended up having to throw out about 40% of the data. And this is because they just click through and, looking at the timing on the web-based thing, there's absolutely no way people could have even read the item. When you're doing your survey, there are some ways you can handle this. You can, inside of Qualtrics, control how fast you go from one item to the next. You can show them the question and time how long it's going to take until they see the response options. You can also go back into your survey and put in some items that says, on this item, mark number 3. So if people are not reading and they're just clicking through, you'll at least be able to catch a few of the people that way. When you learn to program a bit, you can also count the number of times that people are just using end times. On the right-hand side, you also need to watch out for different kinds of response sets. Social desirability being what it is, people will sometimes try to fake good. They'll try to say, oh, do I ever cheat on an exam? Do I ever visit a pornography site? Oh, of course not, or do I always help people? Are my table manners really good? They'll try to give you a picture of themselves that isn't realistic. Similarly, in other diagnostic settings, you may observe faking bad. So I used to work in the University of Iowa, and we would have psychiatric referrals from people in the prison system. And people would come in and they would attempt to portray a mental illness. Because if they portrayed a mental illness, they would get put in the psych ward, and the psych ward was a darn sight better than the prison. There are ways to detect faking good and faking bad. And you need to be aware that maybe sometimes those things are present in your data. They might also be trying to give you the research that they think you want. And that these things speak to the need when you're doing items. You don't just, for example, give all of the items for the first construct you're interested in and all of the items for the second construct. You probably want to mix them up a little bit. That helps control for order effects. And it also makes it a little bit harder for the research participant to suss out what the constructs are in your data. Well, how should we think about how people explain their own behaviors? So cast back in your mind to the very first chapter in the Morling book, where a lot of hay was made about the fact that you should not trust your own personal experiences. You should look at scientific information for making conclusions about things. Now we're asking a shopper, why did you buy this particular product? They're going to tell you something. Are those really the reasons that underlie the data? So if you read the book, they talk about showing women socks from which were the identical same socks out of the same lot, and you put them on a table and say, which of these do you like? The women tended to choose the sock on the right, mainly because it was the last one that you'd seen. Well, that's kind of a present bias. Or people might say, I chose this because I'm a careful shopper. Choosy mothers choose Jif. They're kind of telling a good story, aren't they? Well, why would we then go in and take all of these present biases and good stories that people give us and say, oh, this is the foundation upon which I will base my theory? Perhaps it's the case that those things do make sense. People do tell you reasons, and they should be believed. But it also helps, if you can, to gather data from other sources. Similarly, if you're looking at ratings of data, should we necessarily believe those things? So if you're buying things, in the pandemic from Amazon or eBay, you're going to get ratings back. They'll say, and how did you like it? How do you rate it? And give us a review. Should you really believe those reviews? Thinking back again to the reasons why you should not believe your own personal experiences, the people who may be buying a particular product on the internet might be of a certain profile. Maybe, for example, if you're buying a high-end camera with lots of bells and whistles on it, the other people who are primarily buying that are saying, this is a really great camera because it does all of the fandangled things that I really, really like. It might not be the best camera for you. If you want something that has ease of use, is not going to break very well, very often, and is going to have the ability to take a decent picture in a variety of settings. So again, you might be looking at just the personal experiences of the people out there. Things like Consumer Reports, where they go in and they actually look at a variety of products, that is, have a control group, have several comparisons that they're making, are perhaps, for that reason, more trustworthy. This is from the book again. So in this particular example, everybody seems to like this Sony camera, but Consumer Reports rated it second to last, just as an object example. Actually looking at carefully gathered data gives us a different picture. So here's something that's kind of fun. There are these things that you can wear. That's a small device that actually assesses the behavior that you're looking at. This is called an ear. We've done a few studies here using ear studies. Tim Troll in his lab looks at borderline clients and their interactions throughout the course of the day. And in this particular case, they're looking at the study that addresses the issue, do women actually talk more than men? The paper isn't that big of a, here it is. And they review the fact that up to this point, neuropsychiatrists report, women are just a lot more verbal than men. And a whole bunch of citations about this is an established thing that people actually think. However, if you go in and look at the data assessed using ears across a variety of days and look at the age ranges involved, the number of words spoken per day of men and women are really quite similar. Notice in this particular case, the biggest absolute difference across these was a very small sample of only 7 and 4 people. And in that one, we have a really big difference, in this case, favoring men. But that large difference was to be expected relative to, say, a larger study, 47 and 49 people assessed over a couple of days, there the numbers are much closer. So the actual data gives us a different view of what's going on. Looking at data with eye trackers can actually keep track of what people are actually looking at. Are they really, really interacting with each other? Often people will say, oh, mom and child are interacting here. But really what's going on, given that we have this headset on the kid and we can see where that person is looking, you can see that in this particular case, the mom is looking at the child, as shown in this upper right-hand one. But the infant is looking at the apple that the mom is holding. They are not really having an interaction if we look at the data, even though the mom might think, oh yeah, we're interacting. Okay. You can carry this forward to a number of other situations. Here's a study where they looked at parents and kids and kept track of the different types of speech that were going on. And this particular conversation is about dinner time talk. And you probably have stories from your own life about this, but heaven knows I have some stories in this department. Appreciation expressed by parents and children is fine. The children, however, at dinner time are talking a lot about how they don't like what they're going to be eating. For that reason, parents are negotiating. Parents are talking about health benefits. Parents are not really having a lot of pleasure here. Parents are trying to reward to get the behavior they want. This is also kind of a small study. And if we come back and look at that, here is what we have. It might take, I see that I'm at time here, so let's put a pin in this and talk a little bit more about looking at this particular research study as its own thing. Okay. So